Good morning, everybody. We are here to talk about SAF for the next 75 minutes. I think it's a really interesting and a pivotal moment here to talk about sustainable aviation fuel for a lot of different reasons. One is SAF is no longer an abstract topic anymore. I think it is increasingly becoming an important conversations with airlines and ecosystems and producers. And just a couple of data points to anchor our conversation. Yesterday, Transport Canada released a SAF blueprint, which was 2 years in making. Deloitte, the firm I represent, has been very much involved in development of that. There were some announcements made by Air Canada and Airbus yesterday, which again shows continued signal. The Canadian aviation policy has set 10% SAF by 2030, which is a 1 billion liters. Well, all that is good signals, but there is still questions on market design in terms of who aggregates demand, who's going to pay, who gives producers enough certainty to invest, who carries the cost and contract risk while the market is still in its early stages and forming. And to help us unpack all of that, we have the right perspectives on stage. We have Marion from the Edmonton International Airport to give us a bit of an airport and an ecosystem view and some of the work that they have been doing. We're also fortunate to have Bruce here to look at it from a producer and an investment lens from Montana Renewables. And lastly, Joey here from Rocky Mountain Institute, an organization that I follow quite a bit, and some of the deep thinking that they put out, and we'll be quite interested in hearing from Joey on some market and policy perspectives. So my role here is to just coordinate and ask all the tough questions, and get some good discussion going here from our panelists. First up, I'll just invite Marion to come here from YG to give a bit of an overview of what the airport has been up to. And maybe Marion, as you come and give some opening perspectives, maybe as you close out, also will be important to get an understanding of like what's been the biggest blocker for producing and adopting SAF.
Oh, sorry. Thanks, Arvind. And said good morning. Sorry, I'm still jet lagged from my travel yesterday. So my name is Marion Chivot-Legris. I'm the Director of ESG and Sustainability Strategy at the airports here in Edmonton, although I'm physically based out of Montreal. If you want to connect, feel free to add me on LinkedIn. I've been working in sustainability my whole career. I was previously the head of sustainability for North America for Air France and KLM, the airline. So what is interesting with my background is I saw different side of the story when it comes to sustainable aviation fuel. I'm not going to repeat exactly what Arvind just said in his opening remarks, but this week is the week. We've been waiting for that blueprint to be released for, almost 2 years, I think, Arvind. I think it's 2 years, which is great. And that comes at the same time then the Air Canada and Airbus launch platform. I'm not going to go into details because I'm not the expert, but to give you numbers, basically it's a platform of 13.7 Canadian dollars, so 10 million US dollars to invest. Basically, it's a sustainability co-shared investment platform, and the idea is just to bring a project to a final investment decision, and that's really what is missing right now in Canada. It's just going from just an idea to something concrete with production. And then the blueprint, I put the QR code here if you're interested to know a little bit more about what was there. We got involved as airports to provide our inputs as part of that SAF blueprint. I think it's a good step, but I think Canada still need a national strategy or policy. And we'll talk about it during the panel today, but I think market certainty is something to tackle, and that will only happen if we have a strong framework for Canada. And last but not least, quick zoom in on a white paper that the airports have just released, it's been more than a month now. Also with the support of Deloitte, not that I'm supposed to say it, but they help us and they have a strong expertise. So we found that was valuable to have their inputs. So I put the QR code again. If you're interested in downloading the PDF, it's available on our website. And really what we tried through that white paper is trying to have an overview of what's going on. So it's very small. And it's intentional. It's just to encourage you downloading the PDF and looking at it. And the takeaway of that slide is really, if that map was done 2 or 3 years ago when I was working at Air France KLM, really was Europe leading the discussion. And then now you're seeing Europe, but you're also seeing Asia, which is really something to look at from a market signal. Obviously, America is also moving a little bit, but I would say Canada in particular, I think we have a huge potential to build a strategy. And again, we can have a chat next week and I'll have new updates. I think the UK just released their SAF revenue certainty mechanism this morning. And basically what it brings is the UK government will guarantee SAF producer a strike price. So again, these are mechanisms that markets are starting to explore to move forward. And again, another map from our white paper that just showed what are the potential, projects going on in Canada. And as you can see, there is no feed project at feed level, which is, something that we need to tackle. So with that being said, I think the recent announcement estimate capacity of about 34,500 barrels per day, and that will help to reach the 20% of Canada's projected 2030 jet fuel demand. So we have a huge potential of opportunity in Canada, and I think collaboration. I think it was Terry from the previous panel mentioned collaboration will be key. So with that being said, I will leave the floor to my next panelist, but I'm very excited of being part of the discussion today. Thank you.
Let's go.
Thanks, Marion, for that perspective from the YEG lens. I think that's quite helpful, and we'll get into more of those details in the panel question answer session. Maybe next up is Bruce, south of the border there with Montana Renewables. We've been watching Bruce and his company now for a couple of years, and I think they've been doing a phenomenal job down there and being able to take some early market moves. So I would love to get your perspective. And Bruce, wanted to come and share with us what you've been up to and how you are trying to seed the market.
Thanks, Arvind. I'll try to do that from here. So we're down to the small hardcore group at the end, and part of what we want to do is get you involved in this discussion. So please do use the app and send up the questions, or just raise your hand. I'm gonna take us in a little bit different direction from some of this morning stuff, which is more visionary. This is real. So here's a photo. Guess I gotta provide assistance. No, back. Yeah, there's a photo. So in Great Falls, Montana. Yep. There's the actual plant. We've been running since 2022, so we're coming up on the 5-year mark. And the title tells you some of the things we manufacture there, including renewable hydrogen, which we heard about on the last panel, and SAF, which we're gonna focus on this panel. So those of you that haven't been in an industrial scale facility like this, you can look far lower left. You see about 2/3 of somebody's white pickup truck, which will help you scale. So this is a very tangible thing. We're a for-profit company, and again, coming up on 5 years. So here's an example of where it works. But I'm also going to suggest, and maybe I can stimulate the group with this. This is the exception, not the rule. So there are only 3 SAF producers at commercial scale in the entire Western Hemisphere. We were first, so there's us. The other 2 are Phillips 66 in the Bay Area, and a company called Diamond Green Diesel, which for this purpose is basically Valero on the Gulf Coast. That's it. So if this is so great and we've been doing it for 5 years and we're a for-profit company, where's all of the rest of them? So I'm going to leave that hanging because Arvind absolutely intends to have us explore that. So why does Penware care about this, besides that we're in Great Falls, Montana, which is that blue star inside the dotted red circle? The first thing Penware should care about is you're getting our renewable feedstocks from from the member states and provinces. The Rorschach eye test to the left, those are some of the feedstocks we use and where they grow, like canola, which is the golden color, and unfortunately all the other colors stepped on it. But for that, you would see that Saskatchewan and Alberta are dominant canola growers in North America. And if you take that canola seed, crush it, and squeeze the oil out, you've got a feedstock that we buy a lot of. So, we buy from the ag sector in Canada. We also buy from anybody else's products, and we buy wastes. So, rather than tutor you, I'm just going to leave hanging that it grows around us. It grows in this area, and Penware cares, particularly the farmers. On the right-hand side is where our renewable product goes. And I just want to draw your attention to the dark green, because those are states and provinces. And last summer, it came online across all of Canada that have got a low carbon fuel standard of some sort, an incentive arrangement that socializes some of the costs, and that matters. So we're sitting in the epicenter of where feedstocks come from, and we're really well positioned in Great Falls, Montana, to get the product to the markets that want that product, that have decided to bear the social cost of the higher cost product. So what's this mean? And this is the last slide I want to leave. I'm going to leave one hanging in a second, but this is the last one I want to use for setup purposes. So we've got a really long value chain. The green ones across the top are where the feedstock is produced. It starts with farm and ranch, but that crop has to be transported somewhere. It has to be crushed or processed. It has to be transported again to get to us. And then you pick up the orange value chain across the bottom. So we'll make Sustainable Aviation Fuel component called SPK that's made to a ASTM specification. It's blended with fossil jet because perversely, you're not allowed to use 100% renewable jet in your aircraft. So you got to back blend it with fossil. Don't worry about it. But all of this activity, and then the last mile onto the airfield, which is where Marion comes in, so that the guy that drives his little truck up under the plane, you look out the passenger window and you've seen this. Here comes the guy with the nozzle, and he's going to click in, and here's your fuel. There is a lot of things happening here. There are a lot of things happening here. And almost every step is under a different regulator. A different agency or a different entity is writing the rules for how each of those steps can occur. And if I said, what could possibly go wrong if I'm trying to operate a value chain with 8 regulators camped on 8 different steps? I'm going to leave that as a thought experiment for the group. But the recommended solution is, look, let's harmonize this somehow. Let's ask Penware to get its various regulators on each of those steps, and then across each of the geographies to tie it all together. And what would that look like? It probably look a heck of a lot like something called book and claim, which sets Joey up next.
I think, thanks, Bruce. I think that perfectly sets up Joey now, who is from RMI, and I think the organization and Joey himself has been doing a lot of thinking on that particular topic, which I'm also very, very interested to hear about where book and claim is at, and what policy certainty do we need to start commercializing at scale. So Joey, all yours.
Great. Thank you very much, Arvind. Well, pleasure to be here with you all this morning. My name is Joey Cathcart. I'm a senior associate with RMI, formerly known as Rocky Mountain Institute. And at RMI, our main focus is breaking down the techno-economic barriers to the energy transition and ultimately establishing market mechanisms that can bring commercial technologies to fruition. So the core bottleneck that we see when we're looking at SAF from scaling today is where it still represents less than 1% of global aviation fuel in the total mix. The fundamental constraint, it's not lack of ambition from the industry. It's not even technological maturity, but it's really a mismatch between production and ultimately procurement. So it takes SAF developers, to have 10 to 15 years of commercial offtake agreements from airlines to reach FID. On the other side, it's difficult for airlines to make those commitments and hard to get the financing due to generally lack of creditworthiness. But it's difficult to take on that green premium associated with SAF as a nascent market today. So it really comes down to the challenge of cost. So there's only a couple options to close the cost gap and jet fuel. So you have jet fuel on the left. On your right-hand column, you have the energy value of SAF itself. You have policy mechanisms that can help bring down the cost. You have environmental attribute certificates in the form of sustainable aviation fuel certificates that can also help bring down that cost. And those are enabled by book and claim mechanisms. So what is book and claim and how can it help? A book and claim system is essentially a chain of custody model that decouples the environmental attributes of a product from its physical supply chain. So for SAF is produced, it has a lower carbon intensity, and that has value. That carbon or that environmental attribute certificate can then be transferred to the airline's corporate customers in the form of Scope 1 and Scope 3 emissions reductions. The physical fuel, on the other hand, continues down the supply chain, ultimately blended with conventional jet fuel and uplifted by any aircraft, which is critical. But really what book and claim is supporting is that you have a certified, registered, and retired environmental attribute certificate through this new infrastructure system. And so in addition to the value of book and claim creating value for Scope 1 and Scope 3 emissions reductions for the corporate customers and the airlines, it also has the potential to unlock low-cost debt financing, which is a challenge for the industry right now. Like I said earlier, it's difficult for financiers to invest in projects generally when they can't necessarily depend on the offtake agreements from airlines coming to fruition over time. So by having a book and claim system that corporate customers of airlines can participate in, they can then enter into potential contracts with sustainable aviation fuel producers, their airline customers, and then ultimately give financiers the confidence to invest in the industry. So I'll pause there and give the time back to Arvind, and looking forward to participating in our panel here. Thank you.
Thanks, Joey. I think this slide up here is actually a great segue to some of the topics and issues that we want to unpack. So here's what we'll do for the next maybe 20 minutes or so, and then please get your questions going, and I'll be watching the screen here, and we'll be happy to take a few of those questions as well, or you can raise your hand. There are three important buckets in which we got some perspectives from an airport perspective, production perspective, and some market and policy lens. The one is all about demand. I think it was showing up in the previous panel as well, and that is important to talk about demand, like who's buying, who's paying, because it is still expensive. Just our regular airline tickets. So that's one we want to unpack. The second is about policy. So where is policy headed? Is there policy certainty enough for the producers? And the third I want to unpack is about contract risk and bankability. So we'll get into all of them. Maybe we'll start with Marion. Marion, I mean, airports do not buy SAF or rarely buy SAF at scale, and you're more of an enabler or an ecosystem convener. So what role can airport really play from that demand lens to be able to scale demand and aggregate demand?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's actually a question that we're trying to answer, or at least bring answer every day at the airport, because I think it's unclear. Now, just to reflect on what Bruce was saying, logistically, there is the last mile to the airfield, and that's something to look at. But I think, generally speaking, airports can play a role of ecosystem shaper, market conveyors, and because we are one of the few entities that interact with every participant in the value chain, whether it's the airline, the airport tenant, the fuel supplier, the producer, corporates, governments, and we are really that platform that can just create that collaboration. So I think we can help that collaboration and bringing the stakeholder around the table. That would be the first thing. I think we're touching a little bit more later with the two other panelists about the aggregation of the demand. I think that needs to go beyond airlines. And that's where I think, again, the airports can help for the SAF demand to go beyond airlines. So whether it's corporate travel buyers, cargo shippers, airport tenants, government travel programs, and I will repeat, government travel programs, and defense procurement can also contribute. And all of these players, airports have interaction with these players. So that's the beauty of who we are, is we're a small city and we have a lot of interaction with various stakeholders. I think because we have that role, we can position the airport as a hub for both the production and the consumption. And I think that brings discussion about whether we should have book and claim, whether infrastructure needs to be developed at the airport, and bring this discussion, almost at the same time. I think I'm going to take my former hat as an airline. We're not there yet. We made a lot of progress because the first year I worked on SAF was pre-COVID, and the only two questions I was asking when I was working at the airline to a potential SAF producer was, are you certified and do you operate in a market that offer tax credits? And if I had one no, the guidance I had from headquarters was that you don't even pursue the discussion. I think that we made some progress. Airlines have made some progress. And now I'm starting to have questions from my former colleagues at Air France-KLM about, hey, are you going to have SAF in Edmonton? Because they have mandates in Europe and they're starting to look beyond the book and claim mechanism. What are the routes that are going to be attractive in the future linked to SAF availability? And again, airports have a role to play around that and just having a seat around the table. So I think there is various roles that airports can play, but I think it's really facilitating the discussion and just making sure that SAF availability become attractive for future air service, and that tied to the economic growth, the investment that potentially can arrive in the region in terms of job creation, etc. So really being the conveyor of that type of discussion.
Thanks, Marion. I think your point about connections and ecosystem convening is absolutely critical, but maybe we'll come back to you. How do you still make them open up their wallets and ask them to pay more at a time when people are not wanting to do that? But before we get there, let's go to Bruce. Maybe Bruce, slightly different take on the question. I mean, let's start with market failure. I mean, demand exists, but it's fragmented. So from a producer's lens, how are you looking at demand in terms of what signals are you looking for, like volume, term length, counterparty, and how did you, as an organization, maybe a little bit walk us through the journey of making an investment decision and getting to bankability?
Yeah, I think that's a three-dimensional chess question. So let me take it in three subparts. In the long run, there's only going to be more SAF produced if the investors think they're going to get their money back. What do investors want? They want to not lose their money, and then in a perfect world, they're going to make an interest rate if they're a debt lender, or they're going to have a share price appreciation if they're an equity investor. And so when you step way back and say, if we've only got 3 SAF producers at commercial scale in the Western Hemisphere, are we succeeding? And I think on many, many levels, the answer is absolutely yes. We're sorting through a bunch of technical paths forward. We're experimenting at a pilot scale with alternatives to crop-based transportation fuels. There's a dawning recognition, and I think the last panel on hydrogen did a really good job covering this. it's not only about CO2. What about security of energy supplies? What about reliability of energy supplies? You can keep listing things off. And so I think, as time goes by, we get smarter and smarter about why are we doing this, and we're going to find that continuing commercial development is going to either lower the cost or improve the quality and reliability. Those are kind of linked. So when you take all that on board, projects are not advancing because nobody's underwriting them. Period. Full stop. We got a whole lot of things on the drawing board. If you want them to become reality in the field, somebody has to write a really big check. This is billions of dollars, and the airlines aren't going to write that check. And very, very particularly, one airline is not going to get out in front of the other airlines and decide to pay more for their fuel. They won't survive as a corporation if they take that risk. So what do we need? A level playing field, right? If like the airlines were happy to fly around the world in the late 80s when crude oil was $8 a barrel, and they were happy to fly around the world when crude oil was $150 a barrel. The key is they're all paying the same price. And then if you go a little closer to the ground, they probably need to be paying the same price at that airport because they're selling a ticket to a passenger leaving that airport. So I came into Edmonton for the first time, and I was pretty impressed to see a KLM tail at the next gate. It's like, huh. And then Marion's point, if I paraphrase it, is that plane's got to fly both ways. Is it only fueling from European SAF inbound to North America, or are we going to be able to fuel it with SAF on the return journey? And so over time, all of this is going to harmonize. We're going to get out of some of the experimentation, settle on the ones that make sense. And what book and claim is good for, let's just make it practical. I can put SAF into a United or a Delta or an Alaskan air flight at Great Falls International Airport in Montana. Do they get credit for that in Montana? No, because that's not one of the green-colored states that I showed you a second ago that has a low carbon fuel standard program. Alaska would really, really, really want to get credit for that in the state of Washington. And if Penn were said, you know what, here's how that's going to work in our 10 states and provinces, and you'll get credit because we see that you can prove you use the fuel, and we'll let it credit against a Washington initiative. Then what you have eliminated is what I otherwise do, which is put the SAF in a rail car and drive it a long way on Burlington Northern to get to a physical consumption. And that is wasted motion. With all due respect to the railroads, why am I physically moving a gallon of SAF to achieve an environmental benefit that is the same either way? And the answer is because somebody somewhere, and it might be the corporation, it might be their ESG and sustainability initiative, it might be the state regulator, it might just be the paradigm that I want to see that I use that gallon of SAF in that airplane. You can get all of that friction out of the way, and we have estimated that you can make SAF up to $2 a gallon cheaper if you don't have to physically deliver everything everywhere. That's a big deal. And there's a lot of efficiency left to be squeezed out. So I've gone from the capital to the daily operational. And then the third level of the chess match is who exactly bought the SAF and why. And I'm going to put in a plug for you need to put the most SAF that you can into the smallest planes flying on the shortest routes. Raise your hand if that makes perfect sense to you. Okay, I'm not seeing too many hands, so I'm going to explain it really briefly. And for everybody's convenience, I will direct you to American Airlines sustainability reporting, which they put out once a year, which probably means you're on the 2024 version. But they've got a really interesting data set. Where do the emissions come from? The emissions come from the smallest planes going the shortest distance with the least amount of passengers. Why would that be? Well, imagine I did a touch and go. Let's wake this group up. Raise your hand if you know what a touch and go is. Much better. Thank you. Imagine I did that. I have now moved however many passengers 0 kilometers because I landed on the same strip I just took off from, but I just burnt fuel. So the CO2 per passenger mile is infinite because I didn't get any miles done. So the small planes on the short routes have another characteristic. They spend a lot of energy going up and then coming right back down. And they're probably some of the older airframes with some of the smaller, least efficient engines. You know, the passenger carriers have got these fantastic Rolls-Royce and GE turbines hanging under the wings, and you look at those things when you're boarding, and they look like they're about 15 feet in diameter, and you hope nobody gets pulled in to that intake. That kind of investment is not being put into the regional jets and the small hop turboprops. Therefore, those are the high emissions routes, and they ought to get all of the SAF. We ought to give none of the SAF to the Trans-Pacific flights if we can still give it to WestJet and Alaska and some of the short hop guys. Okay, I'm going to get off of this.
Thanks, Bruce. Thanks for waking up the audience with those questions, with those remarks there. But I think there is a lot that you have shared there and you have unpacked, and I think it's important to keep some of those practicalities in mind because you're living this on a daily basis. And we'll come back to some of those, but let's go to Joey here. Joey, from the work that your institute has been doing, sticking to the theme of demand here. Like where have you seen demand aggregation work best in other sectors or clean fuels or other markets? And are there any lessons that can be applied here in context of what Marion and Bruce have already shared?
Sure. So I think we're starting from a good place in aviation, whereas we're not the first to take on an environmental attribute certificate structure. So at RMI, we were lucky enough to have the opportunity to initiate with our partners the Renewable Electricity Buyers Alliance about 10 years ago. And so that allowed demand aggregation to occur with customers of electricity markets and reduce their emissions from that sector. So building off of that, REBA eventually evolved into the Clean Energy Buyers Alliance. Taking that model, we then questioned, hey, why can't we apply this somehow to aviation? We have Sustainable Aviation Fuel, which is the leading decarbonization lever that the aviation system has at its disposal, but it's not developing at the pace that we need to meet net zero targets. So that's when we came up with an initial framework for developing sustainable aviation fuel certificates. And ultimately that turned into the development of the Sustainable Aviation Buyers Alliance. So effectively taking a book and claim model and ensuring that you can have access for your environmental attribute certificates for the corporate customers who are looking to meet their sustainability targets. So there's some discussion about ESG in the hydrogen panel previously. And so you have numbers and numbers of corporations that are really trying to do their best to achieve their sustainability goals. And by procuring sustainable aviation certificates, that's one way of meeting that objective. So the Sustainable Aviation Buyers Alliance and other demand aggregation mechanisms are really powerful ways to enable the sector to scale ultimately.
Yeah, thanks, Joey. I think that's a great point about the Buyers Alliance and the role that they would have to scale. Maybe one other quick question, linked to demand is also willingness to pay and pricing. And what I've heard is there is various levels of buyers here. We're talking about the airlines and the people that fly, people like us, and then there is corporate buyers, then there is the defense sector, and then there is the cargos. So in your view, and maybe a quick lightning round to all of you, and maybe we can go this way, Joey. We can start with you first. Like, where do you think there is the maximum willingness to pay and open up their their wallet, because somebody has to pay for this because the cost is not the same. Even with the high jet fuel cost today, it's still 3 to 4 times the cost. So I keep coming back to that, and then somebody has to pay.
Yeah, so the highest willingness to pay that we've seen demonstrated in the market is from the corporate customers ultimately.
Okay.
You have your high value consulting firms and banking institutions. Folks who are doing a lot of business, traveling a lot, have high creditworthiness. They have appetite for sustainability certificates of this nature to meet their sustainability objectives. So that's where we've seen the highest willingness to pay. It's really a driver for reducing the cost, as I had high level listed out in the presentation earlier, but that's more or less a primary mechanism.
Marion, what do you think? Is that a similar take from you?
Yeah, I tend to agree. And I would say when I was working at the airline, it was the biggest demand was coming from cargo carriers, because back then it was still the part of our industry still flying across the globe for, logistic demands. But yeah, I do agree. I tend to agree that corporates have a major role to play. And again, travel government programs, I think that's something that can encourage it. I think here it's not necessarily who is the winner or who have the biggest potential. I think it's collaboration. And I think the moment we stop trying to know who owns the problem, but more how we can work collectively on building the mechanism, then it's going to move forward. And book and claim being one of them. But I think and we made a lot of progress. If you look like 6, 7, 8 years ago, and I'm sure with all the experience that you have at Montana, you see a progress. It's slow, but it's moving. Probably not fast enough.
Yeah. Bruce, would you agree with that take of the willingness to pay, or what have you seen?
Yeah, so I'm going to start with what Marion just said, because it's really important. The global SAF ecosystem is actually unfolding incredibly quickly. If you go to one that's not moving so quickly and just pick nuclear fusion, that was 10 years off 50 years ago, and it still is, right? And I'm not being flip, because I actually studied that in university. So SAF is actually making inroads. There's more and more point of origin for producers. It's generally HEFA technology, and those that are not familiar, that just means we're sticking a lot of hydrogen into the renewable feedstocks, 4 and 5 times as much hydrogen as fossil. That's one of the reasons it's cleaner. It's also one of the reasons it costs more. So then if you zoom way back and say, who's going to pay for all this? I think the world is trying to figure out whether this is a social cost that we should spread around through policy initiatives, or whether the passenger needs to, pay for their carbon emissions on that particular flight. And the experimentation in the regulatory and kind of, make the emitter bear the cost of the emission thing is also still underway. The model that the world seems to be settling on isn't clear to me yet. So the EU went with a mandate. They finally gave up. They listened to everybody argue who should pay, and they said, we're going to require you to use it. The industry will then make that as efficient as possible, as low cost as possible, but that's how it's going to be. North America is a voluntary market. BC coming online in another year-ish, 18 months, I guess. And so the corporate customers are important here. It's kind of analogous to who's going to make the electrical price at the data center, be a data center cost, or whether we're going to make all the ratepayers pay it. We heard on the hydrogen panel that, voters are all for this until they find out they have to pay 3 times as much, in which case they're not for it at all. And we're going to have an election and get all new leaders. So, sorting that out is not obvious to me at all. However, I would draw everybody's attention to 2 thoughts here, and I'll state them really briefly. Thought 1, the solutions that make sense and that move fast are going to be local. The greater Minneapolis-St. Paul SAF hub is probably the most mature regional model. We've got the Cascadia guys coming in behind that in the Northwest. But if you have a local solution, you can actually get it done because it makes sense to those farmers, those seed crushers, those rendering plants, that SAF producer, and those airlines at that airport. The second Calgary wants to come online, we will run a SAF pipeline from Great Falls, Montana to Calgary. They just need to want to come online and to create the environment where that investment makes sense. So it's not hard. It's more that we're crossing an awful lot of different industries with different drivers and different objectives. And, you know, somebody has to knit all that together. And I don't know who that's going to be, but if it's not somebody coming out of this Penware conference, then I'll tell you it's not going to happen at all. You know, so I think this is the right forum. This is the right vehicle. And if somebody here is hearing this in a way that they can go push a policy initiative that is local, regional, rather than federal, you know, one size fits all, you're going to get more done and you're going to get it done quicker.
Yeah, thanks for that, Bruce. I think the regionalness part of it is important. And of course, pipelines is a favorite topic in Alberta these days. So maybe your pipeline vision from Montana to Calgary is not is certainly a feasible.
Yeah, and I want to make clear that we're not just, you know, hyping SAF. I've got mine. We built our business. If I was being a Darwinian capitalist, I would say nobody else should be allowed to come in and I will sell all of the SAF to all of the customers, right? But the problem is we're moving things around on rail cars, which on a good day is US 50 cents a gallon. A pipeline is moving that same material for 5 cents a gallon, and it's a completely unnecessary burden if we can clean up the regulatory and tracking scheme. So besides being first to commercial scale in the West, I want to drop another claim to fame on behalf of Montana Renewables. We are the largest player in the 5 registries, which collectively are the global book and claim system. Being the biggest registry player in the world should suggest that somebody might want to come to us and say, how does this work? What would a policy initiative look like locally in the Northwest that would allow us to do something similar here and accelerate this? You think that would happen? And I'm sitting here waiting for my phone to ring. So I mean this very, very sincerely. I don't understand the regional governance. I don't know all of the players. I don't know why a policy might be different in this province versus that state, even though they share a border. And I'm curious, and I would like to know that. And then if somebody had a passion for moving this forward, I'd love to help them do it. So yeah, we will run a pipeline to Calgary in a heartbeat because I can get my SAF to market for 5 cents instead of 50 cents a gallon.
Yeah. Okay, that's a lot of discussion on demand and pricing. There is just a few more that I want to get to, but there's lots of questions coming in from the audience as well. So I think we will have time to get to a few of these questions. But let me just get through a few more on the one on the policy side, Joey. Maybe I'll ask you is there's certainly more aggressive policies we are seeing out of Europe, Asia, and North America. That beautiful chart that Marion had put. And they're all moving at different speeds for the adoption of SAF. Like what policy signals in your research have you seen that you think have been the most effective, both from a federal and regional lens, that we should start thinking about here in the Penwar region to start accelerating SAF production and demand?
Sure. So lots going on globally on the policy side of things. You basically have 2 high-level mechanisms. You have your carrot and your stick approach via incentives or via mandates. So the European market, as you mentioned, is allocating or using the mandate approach through the emissions trading scheme and the Refuel EU sustainability framework to require that a certain amount of blending takes place increasingly over time for SAF with conventional jet fuel. And so that's an approach that has been very effective for in establishing a floor for volume demand to come into play. So we're seeing a lot of interest in getting product to the European market, but it doesn't necessarily help to alleviate the price of the end product SAF itself. So there are mechanisms in the form of allowances or the ETS in Europe, but I think probably some more incentive structure could be supportive as well. So in the US, you have the 45Z tax credit, which you get up to a gallon or up to $1 per gallon of SAF, but that's the cap, and that's been helpful in definitely driving feedstock to the North American market that is enabling producers to get the inputs that they need. But what it doesn't do is it's simply just not the longevity of these incentives is the problem. Right now that credit was meant to expire in 2027. It was then extended through 2029. And that's helpful. That's three and a half years away, but it's relatively, it's just too short when it comes down to it. And it pretty much, if you're a producer, like Bruce, correct me if I'm wrong, but like, I guess I'll ask you the question: how many years did it take you to get Montana Renewables up and running?
One.
Well, that's pretty quick.
But we took an existing chemical engineering process out of a fossil refinery and put renewable feedstock in it. And we just had to make a couple of tactical modifications to things like materials and ability to sponge up all that extra hydrogen that I mentioned. If you build a greenfield plant, and some of these folks may be in the conference, and I'm going to invite the audience to direct the questions to the principal and not to me, but we've got people that have been wandering in the wilderness for 10 years, and they're still not financed because they wanted to build a greenfield plant where they started with a patch of land, but they had to bring everything. And, there's permitting, there is a bunch of non-performing infrastructure, like I had to pave the parking lot for the employees, utilities, you get the point. So there have been many visions of economic transformation in some particular geographic area, and then they quietly disappear again, leaving, as I've said several times, 3 of us. And so then you come back and say, if I want that to be different, what's the policy? And the policy has to be in place long enough, which you just said, and it has to be material enough that investors can rely upon it. And right now, I would challenge the group and say, not any one of you, because any one geography like a province is running a reasonably stable and coherent course. BC is a model, right? They've been doing this a long time. They've got it really, really wired. But collectively, somebody changes the policy every second Tuesday. So there are no investors because there is no stability.
Yeah, so I think it comes down to uncertainty. Like if the uncertainty is there, if financiers are seeing uncertainty in the market, they want a return on their investment. It's difficult to invest with a policy that is short term and could change within a year or two. So that's a key takeaway for me on the incentive side. I think a pretty effective way to go about it would to have some type of blended structure between mandates and incentives. So you could have your LCFF program and maybe stricter mandates that can help create that volume floor, and then incentives on top of it to really help drive the price down. Because like if you have a nascent industry like SAF and you put just a strict mandate alone without any incentives, can't expect that nascent industry to compete. So you have to be able to, if you're truly in the business of driving sustainability and new industry, then it's going to be a balance between mandates and incentives.
Yeah. And I think, Joey, you might have just answered the last question here from the audience was, is blending with existing fuels or using a percentage mandate a practical way to make markets for SAF? And I think you might have just touched on that with your remarks there. Marion, let's come to you here. Just from an airport perspective, like what kind of policy changes are you seeking that would help connect the SAF supply with the airline and corporate demand?
I couldn't agree more with what Bruce mentioned, and then and what you said about the long-term policy visibility. I think that needs to exist over the life of a project and not just 3 years. And changing policy every Tuesday would not help for sure. I think we need stable policy around that. That's the key thing. And this is based on what we observe as airports, because we have discussion with producer, with airline regularly, and this is, the blockers or the barriers that they're facing. I think the book and claim framework, we touched base quickly earlier during your presentation. I think that needs to be transparent. I think the accounting mechanism needs to be transparent because that's how you build trust. You also touch based on harmonization across jurisdiction. I think because we inherently cross-border, like the SAF market, I think somehow at some point that needs to have consistent standards to create more larger markets, I think, and avoid misalignment between rules because that creates complexity for the market. Learning from Bruce, I think, like just call Bruce, ask question, but also learning from Europe, learning from Asia. The white paper that we conducted just show that we can learn, and it's less about copying what's happening. It's more learning from lessons about creating certainty for the market. I think that's really the key takeaway that we can have from Europe. The clear policy pathways, and just having a way of bringing element that talks to investors. Like market stability is key and number one. Learning from Asia, and I found when we built that research that yes, Asia over the past 3 years have accelerate mandates. Sometimes it's not very clear whether it's how it's going to be enforced. But I want to just mention the Japanese example, which is fry to fly, which I really like because it's really like basically they're asking even the public to bring used cooking oil collectively to create a momentum within the society to create, SAF through that pathway. And I think in Asia, you see that's not just the government, it's not just corporation, it's also passenger, general public. And I think we can learn from that. I think we can be creative. And this is just showing that the airline cannot carry the premium alone. And last but not least, I think and we see that from an airport lens, it's really not just about climate policy or decarbonization. I think it's also the competition globally for capital investment. And I think there is a huge potential. Hearing from you, I'm like, we have so much potential in Alberta. Like, we have existing facility, we have the expertise. So now it's just a matter of just what's needed to make the shift and the transition and still, in terms of job creation, economic impact, just leveraging from that. And I think investor will naturally gravitate towards jurisdiction that have clear or clearer market signal when it comes to SAF. So yeah, we, again, from an airport perspective, we're more an observer more than anything else, but we can facilitate the discussion and just bring the right stakeholder and maybe just organize a call with Bruce. Like, how do you do that?
Yeah, happy to help. I've been a petroleum refiner most of my career, or a petrochemical guy, and that's a pretty long career at this point. Energy is always transitioning. This is just sort of a natural unfolding of things that happen when customers want the fuel to be cleaner. But they're not going to give up reliability. They're not going to experiment with something that, if I make the electricity analogy, if you flip the switch and nothing happens, that's a bad day. Those systems have to be reliable. And then the customers are generally going to buy whatever was cost effective for them. So the reason that the local experimentation feels to me like the path forward is people are going to get together and agree what they're willing to afford, what they're willing to pay for. I mean, I lived in West Van for 16 years. That community will pay for what it decides it wants. And so one of the reasons BC is a leader is it can afford to be. I don't think you can try that in none of it. So, I can't emphasize too strongly that the local solutions are going to go because they're going to make sense and they're going to get the support they need. So then if we bring it back to YEG, look, you've got so I don't know if they were first. I guess Tidewater was probably first in BC, but you've now got largest right next door at Imperial Strathcona, don't you, on renewable diesel? Mm-hmm. So let's play a little game. Where does the SAF come from? Shout it out. Okay. So we're going to do refining 101 real quick. It came from the diesel. We simply recover the kerosene out of the diesel, same way the petroleum guys do. So if the SAF price is not higher than the renewable diesel price, if it's not higher, nobody's going to recover any. But the largest, most efficient renewable diesel player in all of Canada is about 29 kilometers away. If you want SAF here, incent them. And it won't take a lot, but it is going to have to overcome a small amount of segregation and a little bit of energy to do the kerosene recovery out of the diesel. We sell diesel, renewable diesel. We, the industry, sell renewable diesel equal to the fossil diesel price. There's not an argument to be had there. How do we do that if the feedstock costs more? Well, because on the U.S. side, I've got the renewable volume obligation from the federal government. I've got the LCFS programs from the states. I've got this producer's tax credit that was mentioned, which used to be a blender's tax credit. There's a small tapestry of mandates. Manitoba and Minnesota, which are facing each other cross-border, both put a diesel blending mandate in place for renewables. You've got to use it if you want to sell diesel in that province, in that state. So there's a collective tapestry of support that actually works, and the customer doesn't have to pay any more for the renewable diesel than he paid for the fossil. And so penetration has been enormous. You may be able to help me with the fact, but I hear anywhere from 70 to 90% of California fossil diesel has been displaced by renewable. Mm-hmm. This is working. But if you want somebody to fish the SAF out of that diesel, we don't have the equivalent signals in the aviation space. And so here's the new frontier. What would you like to do in aviation? And Imperial will be happy to divert some renewable diesel to SAF. They'll literally be happy to. Call them up and tell them that you want to do that. They'll tell you why they're not doing it today. And now you know what the policy has to serve in Alberta. This isn't hard. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, good perspectives there, Bruce, in terms of the products being made and how through renewable diesel, it's really an offshoot there to be able to extract SAF out of it, which I think you touched on one of the questions here. Let's go to some audience questions here, and then maybe time permitting, we can come to some contract risk questions. So maybe let's take the one here on the existing SAF certificates. Are the existing certificate programs sophisticated enough to offer increased value based on how SAF is used, short haul versus long haul, or is it strictly based on fuel volume? Joey, did you want to take a stab at that?
So it's not strictly based on fuel volume, but yeah, the value of the SAF certificate comes from primarily the CI score, the carbon intensity. So if you can get a product that is, say 70% less carbon intensive per gram of CO2 per megajoule, then there's a lot of value in that. If you can get it to zero, there's even more value. So it depends on Yeah, I guess right now it's, you're trying to just get SAF certificates to market. So there's not too much differentiation really between the credits because there's really only one primary pathway, which is HEPA-based SAF to market. There may be a time in the future where there is broader differentiation between the value of those credits if the CI is really actually meeting a zero limit. So I think right now it's still pretty tight, but you might see more of a range in time.
Yeah, so I think that's a good framework. If I answer the question literally as asked, the answer is no. The certificate programs are not sophisticated enough. The certificate is going to be, I reduced, 1 ton of CO2, and that certificate will cost $1 or $2. So that's a pretty efficient carbon market, really. But if I'm American Airlines, if I go back and link to that, which may have, prompted the question, I don't know, but we really ought to tell them, if you fuel your least efficient, highest emitting aircraft first, we'll give you an extra incentive. We'll give you a multiplier. We'll somehow make this gradated, progressive, just like everybody's taxes are. Yeah. And that would, if your objective is to get the most leverage on CO2 emissions, that's a very, very simple regulatory tweak to existing programs. That could be done quickly.
Okay. And then maybe let's get to one more of this audience question here, which is, I think it's the last one here. And maybe Marion, if you want to take I can't see the question now. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, with the idea to target short flights, which Bruce, you just talked about earlier, then how do small regional airports get drawn into the ecosystem? Well, when the federal government does training at these smaller airports, so can policy be driven through this to make them pay?
Yeah, so that's certain. There's a two-part question here. The second one is I'm going to say yes. That's also a pretty easy policy tweak. But play a game and be me. Sit in the middle of Montana, share a land border with 3 Canadian provinces, BC, Alberta, and Saskatchewan. And as soon as you start talking about SAF, who gets all the airtime? YVR, because they've been doing it the longest and they've made themselves really visible. But that's not easy to get to logistically. You're either going to land a barge on that new thing they've got on the Fraser River, or you're going to try to figure out how to drive a rail car through, Metro Vancouver and get it unloaded. And why do you need to? I just went right past Abbotsford. And if I'd go north, we could go to Kelowna instead. And now I'm picking up these smaller planes that I am interested in. So if you said, look, I want to do a couple things. I want to reward the airline consumer and emitter by giving them a multiplier of some kind. And that's not hard to work out. This is public information. And then I want to award the guy that is operating those short flights. That would be the airport operator, I think, somehow. Right. Like, how do you credit back to the airport operator so that they can turn around and address this last mile opportunity, which is I've actually got to get it into the wing. Yeah. All I can do is get it pretty close. Yeah. Somebody else is going to get that into the wing of that plane. And you have to incent that person because you're asking them to change, right? So anybody ever hear the phrase unintended consequences? Let's reach out and go ahead and arbitrarily make changes to a 150-year-old, very efficient, very reliable fossil energy distribution system. What could possibly go wrong? And so operators learn to resist change until that's really been thought all the way through. One of the reasons you can't take my SAF and fuel your plane, you have to blend it back with at least 50% or more fossil. You have to, or it's not a legal fuel. Why would that be? Raise your hand if you're halfway across the Pacific and you're thinking, I wonder what they fueled this plane with. Chicken fat? I wonder what happens if we have to land this thing. And now it's only got 2 engines instead of 4. So the operating industry, no matter what industry you're talking about, has learned to be thoughtful about change because we may learn something, we may observe something that wasn't in the change plan. So I'm good with that. And I'm happy to have this adopt slowly and carefully. But I think if you want to lever the result, help me ship things the shortest distance to the high emitters, which are the small planes on the short haul. We've hopefully landed that point by now. And how do you incent people to say yes to it when you're asking them to accept, more headache on their day job? This is additional responsibility that they're going to be assigned. And every once in a while, the phone's going to ring and the guy out in the tank farm is going to say, boss, I've got a problem here. I'm seeing this weird thing. What do you want me to do about it? That's the change management problem. Now, the fact that BC's got that all ironed out, basically, and I think Canada can understand it since, I don't know, 2011 or so, probably, is a good lever to help other airports progress the way they've learned to. So don't just call me, call Wendy over at YVR and see what she thinks of the daily operability. But really call the canola growers, because what we're doing here is we're creating more markets for products grown in the mid-continent of North America that are otherwise exported to China. Or I'm going to stay away from the cross-border political noise, I guess, so I won't finish that sentence. But ship things less distances, and they're going to be worth more to the person that had to pay the freight. A lot of studies have been done that support that, and a lot of empirical observations, I think, confirm it. We took a small refinery that had 90 employees. We tripled that. We tripled employment, and these are high-tech, high-skill jobs that pay a lot. The average employee in our Great Falls operation on a wages plus benefits basis makes more than US $100,000 per year. That's the average payroll. And we tripled that payroll on the back of that photo I showed you to open this up. So it turns out politicians care about that. It turns out they're supportive when they see the line of sight to economic growth in what is otherwise a relatively poor rural community.
Marion, any take from a small airport's perspective?
Yeah, and then to reflect on Wendy, and so Wendy's my equivalent at Vancouver Airport. They do, and I know she's working a lot on trying to have this platform with like smaller airports in BC to just have this discussion, because sometimes they don't have the resources within the corporate function at the airport to look at these things. So how we can leverage from Wendy's team, I think, is like 20 people. Don't quote me on that, but like she have a big team, and so with a lot of expertise. So how we can just share that with smaller airports that could potentially be a good vector for SAF integration. So yeah.
Okay, we have 5 more minutes. I want to maybe turn to the audience and see if anybody has any question that they would like to ask, which they haven't already had a chance to put it into the question poll here. Okay, maybe hearing none. Let's maybe one last question as we try to wrap this up here, because we might be standing between the audience and the lunch here. So maybe if I guess if we come back to the Penwar conference again, next year or a couple of years from now, what we've heard is we have a functioning SAF market, a policy, or at least an ambition from the federal government of Canada. The question I would have is, how do we continue to make this bankable, investable, when there is still a fundamental disconnect if you go to contracts for a bit, in terms of the traditional jet fuel buyers are still looking for 6 months to 12 months of contract, and yet the producers are looking for a longer term revenue certainty. So keeping that context in mind, maybe any last thoughts and perspectives, like what are some of the single most important breakthroughs that need to happen and that the region can work in the next 6 to 12 months to keep driving momentum in this space? Maybe we'll start with you, Joey, and then we'll wrap it up with Bruce. And we'll just have 5 more minutes, so we want to make sure we get it on time.
Yeah, I think the contract risk sharing between corporates, producers, airlines, that's going to be ultimately the driver that gets the industry to scale. But in advance of that, a policy mechanism that is long-term and durable is going to be what sets up the industry for success in the first place. So I've definitely latched on to the perspective that Bruce brings of having an interconnected book and claim type system in the Penwar region. And this is my first Penwar conference, but I think the fact that Penwar itself as an organization exists gives me more optimism that a interconnected book and claim system could actually work. We heard in the opening remarks that Penwar was established in less than a year, and that might be ambitious for book and claim for SAF specifically, but the possibility, the communication is there already. So it's just a matter of getting the message out to the right folks.
Yeah, thanks, Joey. Marion?
Cool. Yeah, I think the challenge is really not the lack of interest. I think, again, it's the lack of certainty. And I think a long-term policy certainty will really help move forward. I think the whole region, and I'm not just talking Alberta, but like the area of like Northwest, like Pacific Northwest, have all the ingredients. Now it's a matter of just making the recipe and making, long-term, and I'm not going to use incentive because it's not just incentive, but like market signal will only help to move forward. And that's not just one player. It's, again, like having collaborative discussion. And yeah, it's really not the lack of interest. And really, like every week I have like somebody emailing me or calling me and saying, hey, how can we make that happen? And it's not just me and that person. It's me, that person, and 3 other people, and then another 10 people, plus the government, plus the provincial government. So yeah, it's we'll just have to make the recipe now. We have the ingredients.
Yeah, Bruce, any final thoughts in 30 seconds?
Raise your hand if you've heard the word locavore at a restaurant. Guys don't go to a lot of restaurants. So go to the restaurant, you pick up the menu, and they say we grew everything within 50 miles of this restaurant. We got the potatoes at Smith's Farm, and we got the turkey over here, and so on. Locavore. I would think it would be a fantastic SAF panel next year if 6 airports said, here's what we did to make a proof of concept at our airport. It may not be regular business yet, but you can create the conditions where an airline agrees to have that fuel put into the wing of their flight. We will send the fuel your way. Somebody's going to say, I want it made out of this crop because this is the crop that's important to us in our area. And so if we said, look, let's fuel some, transatlantic flight that KLM's going to run out of YEG, but I want it to be Canadian-grown canola oil, not a problem. 2 of our regular suppliers are both in Lethbridge, where there's a couple of crushers. And, we can do that. And then everybody sees it and they say, oh, I thought that was something off in the far future, after some guy built a plant that's going to take him 4 years to get a permit for in the first place. No, we'll have it there next week. And that changes the conversation. But it's got to be a local conversation. It doesn't work when it's not. You wait for a federal solution. God bless you, everyone.
Well, thank you all. Please join me in thanking the panelists here, and thank you for your time.